Let's talk a little bit more about this green transition. And Roman, I think your presentation sort of set the tone. Obviously, it was high level, but so set the tone of where we're at and where we're going. But I just want to, throw something out there to start off with as the devil's advocate here. Given what we've seen in hydrocarbons and what we're seeing in coal, obviously longer term you believe that coal is going to be completely substituted out. But they're doing very great now. How short term is this rally? Obviously we know why why it's sort of exacerbated because of energy crises. But how long? How soon? And do you have any more detail on that?
Yeah, I can take an initial response. I mean, one of the things we've been tracking is investment, and Asia has been where coal has remained strong. I think we've seen really a dichotomy, and we look to see what plants are either announced or under construction, and we look at that on a gigawatt basis. Is it wind, solar, coal, gas, etc. India has actually maintained its plans for building coal. It's dropped off a little bit, but I'd say the rest of Asia, China included, and we've seen even in the course of the past 6 to 9 months, the plans for building coal and new gas have actually been. We've seen the substitution more towards renewables, even in this time where there is such a demand and such a concern. So. Yes, commodity markets right now reflect the real need for having electrons and having that fuel burned. But if we're thinking about what people are building to meet the demand, not of today, but to meet the demand of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, it was a bit surprising to us because I thought just maybe there'd be more of a return or at least a strengthening. But outside of India, and not to say India is a huge market for coal, but outside of India, the rest of Asia has really been putting their investment dollars into non-fossil fuel assets.
Yeah. With China, is it looking more at nuclear as a substitute in that respect, or is it just going down the renewables route?
Certainly, nuclear is part of China's investment plan, but the incremental. If we want to talk about the increment from what we were seeing a year ago, it is more the renewables route. It's the solar and wind.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, look, I want to open up to our panel and say, how has the energy crisis switched public perception, and with that also, institutional and governmental perception? We've spoken a lot earlier today about new capital coming into the market from governments. We've had some very good insights on the IRA and some of the initial implications of where that's going to happen. Is it just this energy crisis that sort of triggered things into gear? And how soon do you see, this positive movement actually converting into real change? Because we saw, I don't know if anyone caught Roman's slides just before, that actually the 2-degree scenario isn't. We're not getting closer to that anytime quicker than we would have hoped. Amanda, could I start with you? If you have some comments on that perception piece and where the capital is going at the moment.
So I think there's two parts of perception. I think in the institutional world that we live in, and at the government level, because we do a lot of consulting with governments and that sort of thing as well. They've realized that, truthfully, the energy transition means transitioning off of fossil fuels. It's going to take 30 years, and it means it basically means transitioning onto metals, because renewable power, batteries, an electrified world requires a great deal of metal. I think they get that. But selling that to public society is a great deal more difficult. So at the institutional level, yes, they've realized it. But mining still is a dirty word in a lot of parts of the world. And so I'll give you an example. Endowment funds, which are a heavy supporter of private equity funds, which then support they're not allowed to invest. They still think mining's dirty. So they've got students and graduates who fund their endowment funds, but or pension funds, their underlying pensioners still believe mining is just as dirty as hydrocarbons. So I think that there's still a lot to be done in terms of changing overall perception in letting the sort of academic and people who are in the know transmit that knowledge down to the more grassroots, because it all trickles down eventually. At least that's my perception.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessie, what's your thoughts on the public perception piece? And also perhaps if you could introduce what you're doing at Launch Stake within investing within this cachet.
So my view on the energy crisis and also the cost increase with the fossil fuel, actually it make the alternative like energy more attractive.
Okay.
And and also energy security energy is another concern. So we see the government actually advocating like sourcing domestic energy. So I think it help like support the speed of the electrification. And for the EV standpoint, and according to the recent like data, so they're expecting 40% year-over-year growth like in 2022 to about more than 8 million units. And also, EV cells like have proven to be resilient in the face of the macro uncertainty, despite the possibility of the overhang of 2022 to 2024. And we're talking about China like hard landing and recession in Europe, and also slower growth in the whole world in general. So the street still like expect like a high growth in unit sales, EV unit sales to like 20 million in 2025, and also like 40 million in 2040. So despite the fact that the current like price pullback for the critical minerals, we still believe like there's a very significant increase in demand of the critical minerals like copper, graphite, and nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements. So from investment standpoint, as an investment fund, we're quite bullish about all this like critical mineral in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that though, with the EV cells, do you think there's going to become a plateau or a pinch point whereby the resources, the constraint on natural resources for the OEMs, the gigafactories that they're rolling out in Europe and North America, do you see that the pinch on these battery metals is might slow the penetration rate at some point quite soon? Also, it seems that the price point on an EV still hasn't really come down to a sort of mass market level. Maybe some models in China, perhaps, but certainly not for European or North American counterparts yet. So it sort of still remains a bit of a luxury item. Do you think that that's going to change quickly, or do you think the penetration rate might have some risks now as they become, as they maintain their price?
Well, I do see some policymaker actually they put out a lot of support for the EV revolution. So I understand the lithium price, like the lithium hydroxide trading like record high, like $77,000. So in the short run, I believe the lithium price will stay at the level of maybe $45,000 for the lithium hydroxide.
Right.
But in the long run, with the supply come online, I do believe the price will go down and will support the EV revolution in the long run.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Julian, do you want to comment on some of these things?
Well, first of all, I think what the last couple of months has shown is that coal continues to be crucial to the world economy. So, if you looked at public perception, certainly in the UK, people thought there was no coal mining anywhere in the world and coal wasn't supplying any power. So King Coal never went away. And in fact, people have made enormous fortunes privately over the last couple of years from people who basically gave away their coal assets for nothing. And coal will have a long life, and met coal will have an even longer life because the incumbent infrastructure is very, very difficult to change. It's too expensive to change immediately to electric arc furnaces or other materials. So I think what the world has seen over the last 6 months is that coal is still around, and we've got to try and work out how to live with it and try and minimize the carbon footprint from the coal, because it's not going away. So I think that's the first point. The second point is where we've really seen a transformation over the past couple of months, I think, has been in nuclear. Because I think it's become obvious that if we're going to make the green numbers that we expect, wind and solar aren't really predictable enough. And sometimes, like in Europe, the summer, the wind doesn't blow and it's not so sunny. And therefore, there's been a real volte-face in perception on nuclear, even in Japan, certainly in Germany, certainly in the UK. I think that's a major shift. And the public perception, despite the sort of worries around the reactors in the Ukraine, generally has been to accept that. So I think that's a big move that we've seen as a result of the events of the last year.
Yeah, certainly the perception piece is there, and taking the crisis for everyone to sort of understand what. Yeah, Amanda, please.
Just to sort of support what Julian's saying, and comment on the sort of coal versus like how long is it? Elon Musk said something when the oil price first spiked. He's like, we've always said this is a transition, and 2050 was a very ambitious date. Yes, it's an energy transition. Both India and China have said 2060 is much more realistic for them to reach net zero. And my understanding is that China is still building coal-fired plants. Like they have a 2060 net zero plan, but for the next 10 years or so, they're still building coal.
Domestically, yeah.
Domestically. A lot of the rest of the world isn't. And part of the reason for that is also, I think natural gas, if you're going to stick with hydrocarbons, natural gas is not only lower carbon footprint, but is also much more efficient if you can get it. But a lot of the inbuilt coal capacity, it's got to keep, for the transition to work, we need to keep those coal mines and those coal burning factories going for another 25 years.
I think if you look at the the chart I showed in the previous session, our reference case has a clear role for coal for quite some time. I mean, even the 2-degree case has some coal. So these cases go out through 2050. So obviously, a wild card is the CCUS part, and that just means that with CCUS that can even get bigger. So,
yeah. Let's talk about some of these technologies then that are coming through that, like CCUS, that are going to help, mitigate some of the heavier polluting industries as well as amplify some of the new, cleaner industries and cleaner battery metal related sectors coming through. Julian, you're doing a lot with Cotec. You're sort of taking more of a value chain approach. What's interesting you allocating capital into what within this value chain?
Sure. So, I mean, we believe that the future is about disruptive technologies, and we see a commonality in that these technologies, as I mentioned before, are using less heat, less water, are cheaper and much more modular. I mean, generally, as Cotec, we are trying to avoid the crowded spaces, which are lithium, because that's very popular, hydrogen production, for which there seems to be many, many different technologies. It's difficult to choose one over another. And we're trying to look for really differentiated technologies, which could be, a world leader. So one of the things we've invested in is a business which can make the pellets for making steel and also for electric arc furnaces without heat. So that alone, the making of pellets, it represents 1% of the global carbon emissions. So to the extent you can do something without heat, you could make a big difference. So that's one area that we're looking at. We are looking also at a technology which can enhance fertilizers by like 10x. And fertilizers are very polluting, and that can also accelerate the growth cycle, and it's a natural process. We're looking at green cement. What's super interesting is that there are now lots of funds in the US who are dedicated to solving the difficult to crack problems around carbon emissions. They're particularly targeting green steel. They're particularly targeting green cement and green transportation. So it's very encouraging that people are thinking about these problems. They have the capital to solve the problems, and human ingenuity should not be underestimated. We came up with a solution to COVID, which we may have also created in the first instance, but that's another story within a couple of months. So I'm very optimistic about our ability to make much greener solutions and lower costs.
Yep, certainly. Jessie, you wanted to
Yeah,
chime?
I agree with Julian. So disruptive technology can be a game changer in the mining space. So I'm very bullish about the direct lithium extraction. So compared to evaporation, direct lithium, like DLE, is viewed as much more like faster turnaround, like production. It also higher recovery rate and stronger environmental characteristic. So for the traditional like lithium brine project, the minimum grade like of the it required a minimum grade of like 400 ppm to make a project economic. So with the DLE, they can unlock the value for low grade, high impurity projects. So, but the technical challenge like they are facing is the how to scale up from the proof of concept to production. They need to be done like sequentially with the appropriate scale. So yeah, if DLE work, it will be a game changer for the lithium space.
Is no one's producing at the moment using DLE, right?
So I think Livent, they have a small production in South America, and also there's a company called Sunrisen based in China. Actually, they help some of the brine project produce somewhere around like 5,000 to 10,000 tons. Yeah, at this point.
Yep.
And Lake has a partner with Lilac, and they are building a pilot plant in Argentina at this point.
Yep. Excellent. Amanda.
So just as by way of background, Arch runs a sustainable resources fund. We invest in development stage mining projects, and part of what we try to do is we put a net zero ambition on every company we invest in, and we go through a process. And our experience with trying to get new production or developing miners to be net zero is that it starts with looking at their existing sort of a development plan and trying to find a way to optimize it. And the technology is often part of that optimization, but it's about reducing their carbon footprint as much as possible. And these days, it actually becomes more, finding a renewable power solution is often, in many parts of the world, more economic than trying to get diesel in, for example. We found that trying to find these optimizations to lower carbon footprint, that you often end up getting a cost savings out of that as well, which is great, trying to replace tailings. But then once you go further into the processing arm and you're trying to optimize for carbon footprint, you often end up going for technology. And that technology further creates further efficiencies and also further carbon savings. And then at the very end of the whole process, the final leg to get to net zero is usually a small amount of offsetting. But you don't start offsetting until you've optimized everything you possibly can on the mine site. And you have to look at it the same way you do like a trade-off analysis when you're looking on which process to build with. And it really is just, when miners are asked to optimize for something other than cost, you'd be amazed how often that they can find a technology or renewables solution, and then be massively surprised because there's cost savings in there as well.
Yep.
It's really quite fun to watch the industry that's one of the oldest in the world change the way they go about doing business.
Yep. Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing we're going to see in the next couple of years is we're going to see more transmutations of elements. You're going to see people, I've seen something that like merges graphene and aluminum to create a copper substitute, which is like lighter. So I think there's also going to be some quite fundamental innovations which are very exciting and will help us produce the things we need.
So one of the engineers on my team is a metallurgist, and we tease her a bit that the next generation of mining is all about metallurgists. The metallurgists are going to inherit this generation just because so much of the energy transition requires the different use of metals and finding different metallurgical solutions to things. We were talking, Julian was on a panel earlier talking about recycling and how everybody wants to recycle. But one of the biggest issues with recycling is we're still basically smelting all of it, which is a highly energy intensive process, which kind of defeats the purpose. But the hydrometallurgical solutions that are coming out for new technology are really, really interesting. But also, as Jessie mentioned, the issue is that none of these are at scale yet. These are all still pilot scale, and someone needs to take the risk on making them work at a commercial scale.
Yep.
I would just put a little competing element to it, because if you go to a petchem or plastics conference, you'll hear the same exact mantra, that the opportunities around having plastics be starting with lightweighting or many other processes. It's interesting because that's looking at that bigger picture. It's really going to come down to a competition, and it's going to be a competition of, can you find those, the decarbonization, can that actually be cost savings? And in many cases, if you look at the abatement cost curves, they can be. But every other industry is also looking at these opportunities. And the petchem industry is one that has the incumbent oil industry on its side. So it's just one to keep in mind as another competitor in the space.
Just delving into the recycling question now, what we're talking just about copper here. What sort of areas is the innovation coming through these hydrometallurgical processes? So we're talking about mostly bulk metals.
So we've looked hard at recycling as just we're calling it urban mining. The recycling industry is actually quite old. There's a lot of recycling in iron ore, aluminum, and copper already in the world. We're pretty decent at, I think we do between 30 and 60% of metal doesn't get, when we say of copper and aluminum is recycled, but that's what's thrown away. Instead of going into a trash heap, gets recycled instead. That doesn't mean it's 30 to 60% of supply. It's nowhere near that. 1% of lithium-ion batteries in the world are recycled at this point in time, and it's just about all done in China.
Right.
They're the only ones who are doing it. The issues, hydrometallurgical processing looks like it might take over lithium-ion battery recycling, but I don't know that hydrometallurgy is working in traditional.
Yeah, there's many people doing hydromet. I think it's quite an unstable process because you have to have the soup of all these different, chemicals, and it is effectively, so hydromet uses acid rather than heat to burn out the metals. But I'm seeing more like benign materials being used in hydromet, which I think is the way it's going to go. Like some people are working on saline solutions, which would be a greener alternative to hydromet. But I think, what's interesting about the recycling is to try and use stuff that is unrecyclable at the moment. So, my agglomeration business, Binding Solutions, can take very, very fine dust waste from iron ore, which is worthless, and it sort of wafts in the wind and you can't transport it, and they can re-agglomerate the metallic content from that. So it's trying to really take something that is seen as a liability and make something of value from it. I think that's going to be an interesting area.
I should mention, hydromet is what everyone talks about, but we've seen a lot of both ion exchange, which is the basis for the direct lithium extraction technology. It's all based on ion exchange. But we're seeing ion exchange applied to a number of metallurgical processes, including recycling, and it's easier than pure hydrometallurgy, which is just about constant titration. But look, technology is going to, in order to get the amount of metal we need for the future and for the energy transition, we're going to have to think of new, better, cleaner solutions for getting that metal. And technology is going to play a huge role. Recycling and new recycling technology is going to play a huge role. This is actually, I think, and I don't know if my fellow panelists agree, in order to get this metal, I think technology and scientists are going to have to play a huge role in helping us get there, because I'm not sure there's enough in the ground.
Could I pose a sort of a challenge to some of the innovations and the stuff that's going on in terms of margins, and like how often so much comes back down to the cost of producing or cost of recycling a new material, an old material into a new use? How do margins play into this recycling piece? And is it going to be a case that you could have the best technology in the world, but unless it's sort of commercially viable in the sense that it can compete with maybe how China's recycling things in a less environmentally sound manner, it's not going to stack up necessarily.
So margins are everything. I mean, business is all about margins. You make margin or you don't make money. I think a lot of this new technology is especially in recycling. Recycling would not be economic if it wasn't for government subsidies. And in the beginning, if we want recycling to play a role, I think governments are going to have to step up and subsidize various aspects of the recycling industry. The biggest issue in recycling is actually collection. And finding a way to collect all of it, and then pick it apart. It's not actually the metal margins that are the issue. It's about getting the goods. And China has a much more efficient system than we do, which is why they do so much recycling. I think in the first instance, governments might have to both help set up the systems and also potentially subsidize some of the technology. I don't know if you agree.
I think the recycling sector is going to go through a huge transformation. So at the moment, it's sort of mom and pop, and it's like mafiosi and you know, scrap merchants. But ultimately, it's going to be corporatized. It's going to scale. And when you buy your Tesla, you're going to already agree that you return it to Tesla. They recycle it. So they're going to disintermediate, I think, the people who are doing the collections. And it's going to become much more respectable. And, you know, as I say, yesterday's waste is tomorrow's assets. So I think we should, as a sector, I know taxes come and go and incentives, but I do think we should be incorporating carbon credits and incentives much more into our business models than we've done historically as a sector. And you know, all of this is going to have to happen, and governments will drive it.
I'm just wondering in terms of and how much of the upstream design of the product have to be part of what is ultimately the recycling solution. It's you know, obviously you can take what you've gotten and then try to make the most of it. But if you move up a stage or two above that process, above that to the design phase, maybe you can pre-design some of these products so that they are amenable, that they're essentially very easy to recycle, and take that step. And I'm just wondering, because I've heard a lot about that, and I think you're probably closer to knowing if that's a myth or a truth.
So we look at recycling as a potential for investment or recycling projects, and we've done a lot of homework on it. And what I can say is it's a hot mess of an industry right now. The only people that have figured it out are China, really. Upstream, it's very interesting what you're saying. Right now, Europe has set a target that 30% of all goods manufactured in Europe from 2030 forward need to be from recycled materials, even though there is zero lithium-ion battery recycling in Europe right now. So I don't know how they're going to achieve that. One of the highest costs in the battery, in the recycling world, is actually picking it apart. It's the energy to break it all up and mash it into 1,000 pieces and then separate it. I think it makes sense, but I don't actually believe that any part of the design process of a lithium-ion battery or a vehicle or any other part of the manufacturing process right now is considering the long-term recycling requirement. Even though they're all being told, like Tesla, that they are responsible for ensuring that their car and the battery is recycled at end of life. I think that the majority of manufacturers, at least in Europe, are just confused and they have no idea what to do. They know it's looming in the horizon, but they have not figured out how to solve it yet.
Interesting.
Sorry.
I know it's you hear that as a guiding principle, and you wonder if there's what percentage of the total improvements you can actually get there or not. So I
mean, there's also a lot of inertia from the incumbents, unfortunately, to innovation still, even despite these requirements. So, you know, we keep hearing from, I don't know, graphene or graphite companies that cement manufacturers are resisting incorporating better products because it suits people to have waste and things that run out sooner rather than later. And so that mentality needs to change.
Maybe it'll take, Jessie said, I mean, lithium hydroxide is at 77,000. I don't think that's a sustainable price. I think that a lot of these highs will come off eventually. But nonetheless, prices like that are what incentivize technology and substitution, because that price is not sustainable. We certainly will not have an electric and energy transition if lithium hydroxide stays that expensive.
Yep.
I don't know if it's recycling that's the solution. I don't know if it's technology, but something's got to give when prices are that high.
Yes, so actually I visit the lithium battery recycle plant in Vancouver 2 weeks ago. So, but still in lab scale, not the lab scale, they have a demo plant there, but they're looking for like a partner to integrate the lithium recycle part as a part of the battery manufacturer. So that they can get the input from the waste directly for free. And I think there's a way to maybe to increase the margin for the lithium recycle, but yeah, we don't know yet. It's still like early stage. We haven't seen any company doing that at this point outside of China.
It's an interesting aspect of the battery recycling industry. Sorry, we're out of time, so I'll be really quick. Right now, they're required to recycle the battery at end of life, but it's much more economic to actually use those old batteries in grid scale storage. So we don't have enough batteries from cars to recycle yet. And let's say at the end of 10 years, that battery is no longer useful in a car. It's actually much more economic to stick it in a tractor trailer full of other batteries and use it for semi-grid scale storage than it is to actually recycle it. So they actually don't know when they'll get enough lithium ion batteries available for recycling. And that's one of the impediments to lithium ion battery recycling right now.
Good discussion with a lot of challenges, it seems, for the sector ahead, but a lot of innovations that are sort of trying to force its way and change how businesses conduct themselves in order to build this tremendous challenge that we have. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.